Welcome, everybody, to this session in our Driving Digital Transformation in State and Local Government. Today's session is going to be about the digital workplace maturity and the unique hurdles for public sector. Our agenda for today is first, we'll talk about and define what is a digital workplace. Then we can go ahead and talk about the digital workplace maturity model, and then that will enable us to talk about the unique public sector challenges. My name is David Broussard, and I'll be one of your presenters today, and with me is Tim Cohn.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Cohn. I'm the director of our global productivity practice here at Quisitive, and David and I both come to this area with a long tenure helping state and local government agencies make the most of the software that they have, right? And be more productive and more able to do what they want to do to accomplish their mission, to serve their constituents, right? While using the licenses and the materials, primarily from Microsoft, that you have available to you as an organization. And so today we'll talk about some of those unique challenges, and we'll talk about helping you organize the creation and the enhancement of your digital workplace, especially with today's hybrid work models. The digital workplace is just as key to the success of your agency as the brick and mortar workplace has been for years. And so the design and the capabilities for that are just as important, or even more important now, with people working from wherever they are. Thanks for your time today.
So let's start by a discussion of what is a digital workplace, because it's kind of hard to understand how that, the unique aspects of public sector in regards to maturity of the digital workplace if we can't talk about what the digital workplace is. So, Tim, why don't you go ahead and talk about this slide here?
Yeah, so it's important for us to have a common taxonomy, right? A common set of words that we use to describe the digital workplace. From the Microsoft perspective, and many of you might have seen this wheel before, a lot of times Microsoft likes to talk about features and functions and tools that are available. And so they talk about the toolbox that you get with your cloud services licensing. For us, the digital workplace, right? The digital workplace isn't, and we have it written on the left there, right? It's an industry term, talks about, but it's people, process, and technology, right? So employees, business processes, technology. The digital workplace wraps up not just the toolbox, right, but the people using the tools and how they deploy those tools in their environment to get their work done. And so it's, the digital workplace is a virtual complement to our physical workplaces. And in our physical workplaces, we had processes. We went over to people's desks. We went over to offices. We moved paper around sometimes. We moved documents around. And all of that has to take place whether we're together or whether we're virtual. And soon it'll have to take place whether we're in mixed reality or virtual reality, right? So as our digital workplace changes and enhances with the leaps forward in technology. And so when we talk about digital workplace, it's not just the toolbox of tools, but it's the people using the tools and the processes that they're using. And so we'll talk a little bit about all that. Thanks, David.
Yeah. So as we think about the digital workplace, one of the things that I like to always mention is it really is every experience, every tool, everything that is digital that your employees are going to experience, right? Now, there is an external digital workplace where we talk about customers or constituents and things like that, but we're really talking internally in this point in time. So it's the computers they use, it's the software they use, it is the tools that they're doing, how much bandwidth they have. All of those kinds of things are part of the digital workplace. Now, at Catapult, what we do is we divide this up a little bit differently. And our view of the digital workplace, we've kind of arranged it into three levels. There's a foundational level, and that is made up of the modern infrastructure, which incorporates important concepts like security, compliance, governance, your data estate. And also in that foundation is this concept of adoption and change management and the usage analytics we use to find out how people are actually using using the tools of our digital workplace. So we know how to make changes and make sure that people are actually using it the way we need them to use it.
And
Now,
David, I would just
what?
say when early in 2020, late 2019, early 2020, when we were first rolling out a lot of the tools of the digital workplace, one of the things we ran into was the fact that modern infrastructure, the policies around security, compliance, governance, data, were not in place to allow for the smooth and controlled rollout for that. There's been a lot of changes made. The events of 2020, 2021, 2022, all the the introduction of the hybrid workplace, right, has driven a lot of policy and a lot of procedure changes that have facilitated that. But for
Yeah.
us, that foundational component, if you're going to build the rest of your digital workplace, just like you're building a physical workplace,
Mhm.
without that foundational support, you're going to have a shaky workplace, right?
Yeah.
So it's critical to have that in place. Thanks, David.
And and it's important to recognize that once I have that nice firm foundation, right, I'm going to start crafting my services on top of that. And those services could be in relation to files around collaboration, files and tasks, right? It could be about communications, whether that is live streaming meetings or whether it is having collaborative meetings or whether it's a phone call or whether it's email or messaging in your websites. All of that kind of communications is one of my services toolboxes. And then, of course, we have apps and automation because we need to automate things. We have applications that we build. All of that's built on top of our foundational element. And the capstone of this, where we actually achieve our value proposition, right, is what is called the digital employee experience, or DEX. The digital employee experience is the reason this is important is this is where we make sure that we are aligning the experiences that we're producing inside of our organization to the goals and the mission that we have as an organization. Now, everybody can have a digital employee experience. It can be completely and totally haphazard, right? But if we approach it with intentionality, with an eye towards saying, how can I leverage communications, collaboration, and automation to actually make sure that my services that I'm developing are maximizing my value proposition, that's when we're actually starting to see the realization and the value of a digital workplace.
And part of making that digital workplace or the digital employee experience a good one, right, is having your employees feel more productive, right? Having them be more productive, having them get more done in their day, having them get home at the end of the day without a million things hanging over their head, right? And so that
And
digital employee
feeling
ex- go ahead.
and feeling like the things that they're doing in a given day are actually aligned to the corporate business goals that you have as an organization, or the organizational business goals, right? To make sure that, if I show up and do my work every day, I know how that fits into the larger picture.
Right. And so there's strategy behind aligning each part of your digital workplace
Mhm.
to meet your organizational goals. And that's what we want to talk about next, is where we talk about the maturity of your digital workplace and how to move from a less mature digital workplace to a more mature digital workplace. And a lot of that is about aligning the activities that you're doing to make your digital workplace better to your agency or your departmental goals. And so if the
Exactly.
goal is to, serve more kids and make kids safer in Texas, or if it's to make the highway inspection process easier in Georgia, or whatever the organizational goal is, the key to aligning what you're doing to build out your digital workplace infrastructure is aligning that to your organizational or agency goals. And so this is where the maturity model comes in, and the strategy around doing this. And if you don't do the strategy, well, you kind of have to expect that your digital employee experience is going to be
Less
uh,
intentional.
less intentional or
Less
highly
intentional.
variable, right? So
So
It
let's
can be
take
a
a look at
mess.
this. Yeah, let's take a look at this at the whole concept of a maturity model in the first place. You know, we're usually very familiar with the idea that I start at a low or a base level. Could be numbers, could be words. We chose words, but a base level and into a low, mid, high, and finally an Excel um, uh, a dynamic level, right? At the highest levels. And if you think about what's going on here, what we're talking about is saying, look, at a base level, from a digital workplace standpoint, it's the same tools and work style that we've always done, which is often, by the way, very highly siloed. That involves a lot of context switching for our employees between various different tools to get their work done. At a low level, end users start to discover some synergies between all of their tools and start to figure out how, hey, wait a minute, maybe I can surface both of these tools in one location and start to figure out how to become more efficient. Maybe I can use some personal productivity tools to become more efficient. Getting into the mid-level, we're starting to actually coordinate that work. And we're saying, hey, let's identify some processes and let's coordinate that using some of the tools that we have inside of, say, the Microsoft Cloud. As we get into the high level, now we're starting to bring analytics into this. We're saying, hey, how are people actually using these tools? And we're measuring the efficiency of how people are actually working. And our end users are getting much more adapted into coordinated work or intentional work at that point in time. People are now saying, hey, I go to this one place to get all my work done. And when I'm done with that, I go to my next place to get that particular task done. And eventually at the highest level, at the Excel level, what we're saying is that we're going to actually look at our processes and we're going to design them around collaboration and communication and automation. And we're going to use the data from those processes, both through usage analytics and through the apps themselves, to monitor and continually improve them. Now, we could take this and this one model, and we could go to a lot of organizations and we could say, yeah, this is where you fit in on this particular model. However, that would be difficult when we go back and think about how do we apply that when there's so many different areas inside of that digital workplace. Because you might be highly advanced in one area and lagging in another area. So how do you actually come up with a number that makes sense across that? And so what we've done is we said, instead of doing that, a single value across the way, what if instead we actually looked at each of those different areas, right? And said, hey, let's take a look at each one of these and break it down on this base to Excel level, right? So as an example, if I were to just take security on there, right? If we start out, we've really we're firefighting, right? We're just going out there and handling security problems as they arise. But as we move up the way, when we get to the mid-level, now we're starting to align with frameworks, okay, and making sure that what we're doing actually aligns to what we need to do, so that we've got a purposeful way of implementing our security. And at the very highest level, we're talking about continuous measurement, continuous improvement, the use of things like cognitive services to see how things are happening and to dynamically, very quickly respond to threats so that our response time is greatly reduced. Okay.
And,
So
and David, I would say that if anybody has worked with other maturity models like the capability maturity model for quality, right, or for a software development model, you'll see some things that are familiar here. Those types of models are pretty consistent. What we've done is apply this one specifically to the digital workplace understanding, and then the interior blocks on this. There is the levels are pretty consistent, but the interior blocks on this diagram can change a bit from client to client depending on your organizational
sure,
goals, right?
yeah.
So
and
you know
and
the
that's important to understand, that what we're talking about doing is working with an organization to find out where they happen to be on this maturity model, right? Because you're not going to be at the same place across this different areas. So for example, in this example, our security is, man, we're doing a great job on that because we knew it was very important. But in other areas, we haven't gotten as advanced in looking at those things. Okay. And our process is designed to look at those maturity models and then figure out where you need to be to attain your goals and your vision and your mission for your organization. And then that gives you an understanding of where you are today and where you need to be. And if you'll notice, there's one on there you say, well, oh, adoption and change management doesn't have anything. Well, that's because maybe you're satisfied with being at that level and you don't, and for what you're trying to accomplish, you don't need to get any better in that area. And there's other areas where you do need to get better. And so this approach allows you to take the large concept that is the digital workplace, break it down into a series of smaller areas, and then approach each one of those areas a little bit differently based upon what you have to attain. Okay, so let's now that we've talked about what is a maturity model and talked about our approach of looking at that maturity model and what's a digital workplace, right? Let's talk about some of the unique challenges that people in the public sector may face, okay? So, to start with, one of the big concerns, and I know, Tim, you and I have talked about this a number of times, is that when you're talking about public sector, a lot of times that group is actually comprised of a whole bunch of different agencies. And while I, as a city or a county or a state agency, may have well-defined goals and mission and vision alignment, right? A lot of times the departments, the sub-departments, the agencies inside of there, a lot of those different groups are going to have very, very different interpretations of how they need to approach those goals and mission and vision to achieve that. And so one of the examples I was talking with Tim earlier is you might be talking about like permitting inside of an organization. We need to issue permits. Well, that has a certain way of approaching and certain specific goals and KPIs. But if you then turn around and talk about, say, the police department, okay, totally different way of measuring things, totally different approach, and they're going to have different takes on their digital workplace maturity.
Yeah, I think if you look at a permitting and licensing organization, right, they're going to have one set of needs where a law enforcement or public safety organization is going to have and they'll also have different compliance requirements, right? One might
Definitely.
be CJIS require, need a CJIS tenant. Another one, might need something for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, right? A FERC have to meet some FERC standards. Another group might have to meet licensing standards from a particular medical board or a medical association like HIPAA and some of that. And so, a state health agency, right? And so we always see, especially when we have tenant coexistence, so that's a bunch of agencies in the same tenant, there's always an issue with competing compliance regimes, right? So either, and where, a department that's running city programs that are basically city created, they don't run up against a lot of federal compliance. They don't need the same amount of security and oversight as a CJIS environment needs,
Yeah.
right? And the complications and the additional work that comes around meeting your compliance standards in a tenant coexistence is definitely one of those challenges, right? So that means
Sure.
that you need a individualized approach across departments, right, for that maturity model, and
Well,
that a one size fits all rarely fits all.
Well, and if you choose to go the other direction, right, where you take that one tenant where everybody's in it and you start breaking it up to a number of other tenants, you start to have problems with the ease of collaboration between the different agencies. We think of ourselves as a city or as a state or as a county, right? But if I'm in one tenant and you're in a different tenant, Tim, then it's hard for us to share that information with each other when we're
Yep.
not in the same tenant. But sometimes we need to do exactly that because we don't want everybody to have to for example, have CJIS compliance because that's actually quite difficult.
Yeah.
And that leads us to security concerns as well, right? Because the same thing is true there. There are certain parts of our organization that are going to have very different security concerns than other parts of our organization. And if we make everybody work to the most secure model, then we can be putting additional steps and difficulties on top of groups that don't need that level of security or compliance.
Yep. And some of the approaches we've taken to those problems have included security batching. So batching agencies with similar needs, right, into to
Similar
coexist
tenants, yeah.
within into a similar tenant, right? And we look to minimize the number of tenants, right, so that you maximize your collaboration across there. And the other one is, of course, when you get into things like data sharing and having siloed data, going into these projects knowing that you're going to need data sharing agreements between agencies in the tenant, and that coming into that tenant, those agencies are going to have to understand their particular data compliance needs and make sure that those data compliance needs are protected through a data sharing agreement that states and putting in what we call minimum safe standards, right, for data protection, and making that a standard across all tenants, and then building upon those safe standards and moving upwards from there as necessary to meet compliance. So there's a couple of different approaches to go in there, but all of those take some strategic thought, right, at the highest, at the highest level of the organization grouping that you're looking at. So
well, and it's important to recognize that, in that kind of in that strategic thinking, right, what we're shooting towards is we want to make it as easy as possible for the people in our organization to be able to collaborate and communicate with each other. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we are compliant with regulations, that we are secure and guarding data appropriately, and making sure that, and like I said, that could mean some people in the G cloud, some people in commercial tenants, some people still staying on premise at various points in time, because those challenges can start to multiply at that point in time.
Yep. And so all of that just speaks to the additional planning. I think another area that many agencies see is the incorporation of user developed applications, right,
Sure.
into cloud tenancies. I mean, I've seen departments with 200, 250 access applications that have to be, modernized, and
or a couple thousand Excel workbooks,
or thousands of Excel workbooks in Excel farms and different things like that.
all with VBA script, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so, and then there are some specific ways to address that using the tools in M365 and things like Teams Dataverse, right? And we talk a little bit about that in one of our other presentations. But those things about user developed applications, as well as records retention, discovery, not every public or private sector organization has the same records retention and discovery needs as a state agency, right? And so there are some specific needs around state libraries and other things that you have to address as you go through the creation of your digital workplace, to make sure that the records that you have and everything is stored. And everything from chats and individual chats, one-on-one chats, to contracts,
Well,
all has to be handled.
A lot of public entities have got very different reporting requirements across emails, conversations, and files. Whereas a lot of organizations can simply say, oh, we chats, we don't care about those. Many public sector groups are required to produce those if somebody comes along and says, hey, I need to do an open records request. And so that ability to not only make sure that I've retained them for the appropriate period of time and then deleting them and making sure they're deleted, but also that ability to go out and actually find those records when a court order comes down, or when there's a request from the legislature, or when there's an open records request. That ability to be able to respond properly to that is a challenge that public sector faces that's very different than what a commercial organization or a nonprofit would face.
Yep. And so when you're talking about your digital workplace maturity, all these things come into that, especially when we talk about, there's an applications box under the UDA, all under the maturity model, and all your UDAs would fall kind of into that box of the maturity model. What are we doing with them? How are we going to address them? That type of stuff. And prioritizing that work is key, because budgets aren't endless and time is not endless. And so we've got to allocate scarce time and scarce monetary and personnel resources to address all of these. And so again, getting into the how you want to address those application remediations or modernizations, or security concerns or tenant how you want to do that, and having that maturity model to guide that is very important.
Yeah. So a few of the things that we talk about that are still challenges. Reaching out to your constituents is something that is a challenge that a lot of private organizations don't face. There it's a customer outreach, it's totally different, right? But when we start talking about holding town halls and live streaming events like city council meetings or commissioners courts, or anything like that, those are challenges that a lot of times private organizations don't deal with. And one of the reasons for that is that, they're not required to make sure that their constituents who may not speak English are able to actually listen to and or watch or participate in these events. So that ability that is out there, for example, to take an event that you're live streaming and then having it pre-build translated closed captions, so that if I'm showing up and I want to be able to watch this particular town hall in, say, Vietnamese, right? That ability for me to be able to go out and do that can be very, very powerful. And that is a challenge that, most commercial organizations can just go ahead and not think about, because it's not as important to them.
Yep. And then,
And
device and connectivity is always an issue when reaching out to constituents. A lot of the technology in the cloud now and a lot of the application modernization projects that we do are targeted at making sure content is available through the lowest common denominator technical format. And that's usually a phone, right? To tell you the truth.
Yeah.
So having all that stuff available and ready, and all your content being able to move to a platform that's as small as a smartphone, absolutely critical.
Yeah. And so the last ones we'll talk about is has to do with organizational change and adoption, right? And there's a couple of things in here that are actually important. One of them is we're seeing this with all organizations, is employee generational spread, which means that we've got 5 generations in the workplace now. Sometimes more, but those people are spread across a wide variety of ages, and they have different ways of working. Okay, and so with commercial organizations, they can decide, we're only going to hire this type of person. We don't have that opportunity when we're talking about the public sector. We have to deal with all of those different kinds of individuals, and so having platforms that make it very easy for us to change a work style and to allow people to work the way they want or need to be able to work is a powerful answer to that particular challenge.
Yeah, and there's a when we talk about especially digital employee experience or digital constituent experience, that's one of the columns on the maturity model. And by investing time and money into how that experience looks for your employees, you're also helping to do things like retain employees longer, hopefully, and make them more efficient and more productive. And so
which actually leads into the last one we have on there, which is the high employee mobility. One of the things that we've seen a lot of public sector organizations face is the fact that it is actually, public sector tends to be part of a rather large organization. If you're in, for example, I live in Texas, and if I work for one agency in the state of Texas, it's relatively easy for me to go work for a different agency in the state of Texas. And in that kind of situation, we often see even higher movement of employees both inside my agency and outside of my agency. And in that kind of situation, being able to handle the fact that I've got people moving who they're not actually new people. It's not onboarding a new employee. It's simply onboarding them into my agency or into my department. And that can be a bit of a challenge as well. And so dealing with that mobility of employees means that we need to do things like save their institutional knowledge, so that when they go someplace else, we aren't losing that institutional knowledge. And when somebody comes in new, they can look at that topic database, that knowledge base, and leverage that going forward.
Yep. It's as people move, and as people go back and forth between the office and home as well, having that ability to pick up exactly where you left off at the office and carry on forward is very critical.
Very nice as well. Yeah, that mobility is not just inside, but it can be personal mobility, moving around and stuff like that. Hadn't really thought of it that way.
Yeah, and so it's part of that is let's put that on the maturity model, right? Let's figure out where we need to invest to get to that next step. And that investment can be projects that you do. It can be configurations that have to be made within the environment. There are a lot of different ways to move yourself up the maturity scale. And each movement up the maturity scale usually means that you're collecting more data, you're using it better, you're learning. And so even capturing the results of that workplace maturity movement can itself become a metric as to how your overall digital workplace building is going, right? So, and that lends itself towards having a digital workplace office within a technology oversight office, whether it's something like the DIR or whether it's something like a CTO within an organization, a chief technical officer or a chief innovation officer, or even within I've known agencies within the state of Texas to have organizational change officers, right? And so having those folks involved in this process is absolutely critical as well, because one of my organizational change people once told me that change is pain. And when you grow as a kid and you have growing pains, and then as adult, you may stop growing, but you have change pains. And so every time you change, it can induce discomfort.
Yes,
and so managing that is really important. And so there's adoption change management is one of those components on the digital workplace maturity scale, where I always think it's best to move towards the top. So thanks, everybody.
Yep. And so thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it's been very helpful and that you've learned a lot. And what you can do is go out and take a look at either of these QR codes and connect with the experts and learn and speak with any of us that have in these sessions you've seen. Or you can also, we'd love for you to give some feedback. So go ahead and follow the second QR code, and that will enable you to go back and do a quick 3-question survey and let us know how we did today.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.